Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for the CBS 6 News at noon. I'm Julia Dunn. The trial of Sheldon Silver continuing right now in Manhattan. Day 3 of deliberations after the holiday weekend with yet another bump in the road. The former Assembly Speaker, of course, is accused of taking millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks. Capitol reporter Kimberly Howard has been following this story for us, and she joins us live from Manhattan this afternoon with more. Kimberly, what's the latest here?
Well, Julia, for the second time since deliberations got underway last week, a juror sent a note to the judge saying that he wants out. Take a look. This is the note that's from a juror who is also a taxi cab driver, and it says, quote, "I no longer wish to participate as a juror on this case. I believe there is a conflict of interest that I just learned about." Apparently, someone this juror works with informed him that the person who owns his taxi cab medallion, quote, hangs out in the same synagogue as Sheldon Silver. Now, the juror says the owner of his medallion is a, quote, very rich man who likely frequents the same places as Silver. Ultimately, the judge instructed this juror that nobody can retaliate against him for his jury service. And after making sure that this juror could, in fact, put this out of his mind, he then went back and began deliberating once again with the rest of the jury. This, as I mentioned, is the second time there's been an issue with a juror during deliberations. Just last week, a different juror was asking to be dismissed, rather, after facing some pushback from her fellow jurors saying that her heart was beating fast and that her head felt weird, that other jurors were apparently accusing her of not using her common sense. In that instance, the judge simply reread some of the juror instructions and once again told this juror to go back, deliberate with the rest of the jury, and did not dismiss her. So now we have two jurors who have indicated to the judge that they would want out of this case. There are two alternates at this point, but at this point, no one has been let go, no one in addition since deliberations got underway. We, of course, will keep you posted on this as it continues to develop in Lower Manhattan. Live in Lower Manhattan, Kimberly Howard, CBS 6 News.
Good evening, I'm Liz Bishop. Breaking news at this hour. Guilty on all charges. A federal jury found former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver guilty of honest services fraud, extortion, and money laundering. He's accused of using his official position to scoop up over $5 million in bribes and kickbacks. The end of a long legal battle that began with his arrest in January. Capitol reporter Kimberly Howard is in New York City, where she has been tracking this trial right from the beginning. Kimberly joins us live. Kimberly.
Hi, Liz. We are here outside of the federal courthouse. We are waiting for Sheldon Silver and his attorneys to step out at this point. Not quite sure if they are going to walk down those steps, but I can show you this. There is a swarm of media here waiting for him at this point to come down after this news just broke just over an hour ago that he was in fact found guilty on all 7 counts. We're talking about fraud, we're talking about extortion, money laundering, all in relation to those 2 separate schemes, one involving a mesothelioma doctor, the other involving 2 real estate developers. This case has stretched on for weeks. We've had several issues with the jurors. One just earlier today, just hours ago, juror number 11, a taxi driver here in New York City, sending a note to the judge saying that he wanted out. He wasn't sure if he could continue with this case because he was concerned about his job. He was concerned that the owner of the medallion for his taxi cab had some sort of relationship with Sheldon Silver. This is something that apparently came out over the long Thanksgiving break. That was also a concern last week. We had another juror who said that she wanted out. Her heart was pounding. Her head felt weird. She wanted to call it quits as well, but the judge was relentless. She did not let either of those jurors leave. And today, at this point, we have a verdict. At this point, as I mentioned, we're waiting for Sheldon Silver to come out. At this point, we have not seen him since he was in the court, but I was in court when they were reading those 7 counts, those guilty verdicts, one by one. I was sitting just a few rows behind him. He seemed calm. He seemed cool and collected. He was tapping his fingers ever so slightly on the desk in front of him. But other than that, he even smiled at one of his attorneys on the way out. So certainly not, upset about this at this point. We can only imagine that if they do come out, they're going to say that there's going to be some sort of appeal after this, that this really isn't the end. Of course, there's also the sentencing at some point. At this point, we don't know an exact date of that sentencing, but of course, we'll keep you posted. We're going to stand right here in front of the federal courthouse, wait for Mr. Silver and his attorneys to come out and make some sort of statement. But for now, we are live in Manhattan. Kimberly Howard, CBS 6. News.
Good evening once again, everyone, and thanks for staying with us. I'm Liz Bishop. He was once one of the most powerful men in New York's government. Today, he's been convicted on federal corruption charges. Sheldon Silver found guilty. The verdict read just about an hour and a half ago. Capitol reporter Kimberly Howard has been following this story for us. She joins us now from Manhattan to fill us in on what happened in the court and what happens now. Kimberly?
Hi, Liz. Well, you know, this verdict came down just about an hour and a half ago, and here we are outside of the federal courthouse in New York City. Still no sign of Sheldon Silver. We are expecting him, hopefully, to walk down those steps to give some sort of statement with his attorneys. In the meantime, take a look at this. A swarm of media, dozens of reporters here waiting for that statement, what they will say. We can only expect that they're going to announce some sort of appeal after this conviction. But as you mentioned, guilty, 7 counts. We're talking about mail and wire fraud. We're talking about extortion and money laundering. And all of these are in relation to 2 separate schemes, one of them involving a mesothelioma doctor, the other involving 2 real estate developers. This is a case that has been going on for a month now. This is actually the beginning of the 5th week in this case, and there's been no shortage of drama. There's been issues with several jurors, including one juror earlier today, a taxi driver, who indicated that he wasn't sure if he could go forward with this case as far as deliberating this case. He was concerned about his job. He was told over the long holiday weekend that perhaps the owner of the medallion for his taxi cab had some sort of relationship with Sheldon Silver. The judge told that juror, as well as another juror last week who wanted out, that they had to continue deliberating, that they had to come to a verdict, and that's exactly what they did just after 4 o'clock. I was in the courtroom just a couple of rows behind Sheldon Silver when they were reading those verdicts one by one. Guilty, guilty, guilty on all 7 of those counts. He really didn't show much emotion other than I did notice him kind of tapping his finger slightly on the desk as they were reading those verdicts. He also afterward kind of smiled at his attorneys, so definitely wasn't seemed saddened or upset. Quite the contrary, actually. Liz?
Kimberly, we know pretty much, I mean, we expect that there will be an appeal, but how about his assembly seat? I mean, he has to forfeit that now.
Yeah, that's right, and that's an assembly seat that he has held for more than 40 years, for almost 40 years. Rather, when he was arrested last year, of course, eventually he had to give up his seat as far as being the speaker, his post rather, and then he continued to hold that seat and said that he would be vindicated. Now that this conviction has come down, that's something that he can no longer hold on to, and in addition to prison time that he could be facing, he also is most certainly going to be giving up his assembly seats. Liz?
I'm guessing there's other ways out of that courthouse. Do you have pretty good idea that he is going to come and talk to reporters? I mean, that he will want to address this?
Yeah, you know, there is another door. We know that some jurors actually right now behind me are walking out right now. They have been told by the judge, these jurors I just want to show you, they've been told by the judge not to speak to the media. The judge had this whole speech, obviously, that jury deliberations are secret, that they should remain secret, and that those aren't the first jurors that we've seen come out. We saw juror number 11, who I mentioned earlier, come out, also did not speak to the media. So didn't mean to digress, but I wanted to mention that as those jurors were walking out there behind me. But yes, there is another door out of this courthouse over on the side. We've spoken with some reporters who've run up briefly just to see if he was in fact still in the courthouse, and it's our understanding that he is. So at this point we are waiting for him to come down the steps because we are expecting an announcement of some sort of appeal. We would imagine that he would want to talk to the press, make some sort of statement, but again at this point no sign of him. It's been about an hour and a half since that verdict has come down. We'll throw it back to you, Les. We are live in Manhattan. Kimberly Howard, CBS 6 News.
All right, Kimberly, we'll cut right back to you if he does come out and decides to talk. A stunning fall for one of New York's most powerful politicians, accused of getting nearly $4 million in bribes and kickbacks. Sheldon Silver found guilty of all the charges in his corruption trial. We're going to go straight to Kimberly Howard, who has been covering the court case for us in Manhattan. And Kimberly, what reaction have you seen to the verdict? And we just saw Sheldon Silver leaving the courtroom, and he did not speak, did he?
you know, we really couldn't tell. If he did say something, it wasn't much. He did walk down those steps just minutes ago, completely swarmed by the media. Several reporters firing questions at him, trying to get an answer. As far as an appeal, I mean, he really was completely bombarded. It was hard for him to walk, as well as his attorneys, as they slowly made their way from the staircase to a car that was waiting here in the road. There's still a bunch of reporters here kind of milling about, talking about this case. Of course, huge news, not only in Albany, here in New York City, to rock really this entire state, the implications of this trial. Now, just actually a minute ago, I did run up to his attorney, Joel Cohen, just to get the specifics on any sort of appeal, because that's what we couldn't hear when there was this big swarm of media. And he did tell me that, of course, they will appeal, that this is something that, you know, could take several months. It could be something that we're not seeing until February. So there's no sentencing date. The judge didn't talk about that in court. But we do have video of Sheldon Silver, going into court earlier today. While he was in court, while those guilty verdicts were being read, one right after the other, 7 counts, he was pretty much calm, cool, and collected. I did notice him sort of tapping his fingers on the desk in front of him as they read those guilty verdicts. But other than that, pretty calm. The jurors were calm too, and perhaps that was a surprise to, you know, many of the media members who have been covering this trial, because there's been so many issues with the jurors, including just hours ago, including earlier today, a taxi driver saying that he wanted out because of this case. The judge would not let him out, would not let him leave, urged him to continue the deliberations, and that she felt that he could, you know, come to a verdict. That's exactly what happened hours later. And just minutes after this verdict, the U.S. Attorney, Preet Bharara, released this statement. We'll show it to you here. It says, "Today, Sheldon Silver got justice, and at long last, so do the people of New York." That was sent out literally minutes after this verdict came down, just after 4 o'clock. And that really is the feeling here in New York. Several people waiting outside the courthouse, other than the media, people who live in Sheldon Silver's district, which this is Sheldon Silver's district right here. He was tried in his district. People joyful that this is happening, saying that, you know, it's about time that somebody in Albany did get convicted of these types of crimes. And once again, Sheldon Silver himself not saying much, at least that we could hear, as he was bombarded by the media as he walked down those steps. So we'll bring you much more coming up at 6:30. But for now, we are live in Manhattan. Kimberly Howard, CBS 6 News.
Jury decision rocking Albany tonight. New reaction pouring in from lawmakers about the conviction of former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver. You'll see Silver leaving court just about a half an hour ago after he was found guilty in his federal corruption trial, before he was even out of the Manhattan courthouse door. You can see next Silver's name removed from his office door at the Capitol. CBS 6 was there when Silver learned the verdict that cost him his assembly seat. Capitol reporter Kimberly Howard joining us live now from Manhattan. And Kimberly, I know he's gone and it looks pretty quiet where you are, but that's been a really exciting afternoon. What's been the feel like there?
Well, really, the feeling in the courtroom is sort of permeated outside to the streets here. Several people were waiting for Sheldon Silver to come down the federal courthouse steps, many of them expressing excitement when they found out that he was convicted on all 7 counts. You see him here walking out of federal court. He's been convicted on 7 counts: mail and wire fraud, extortion, and money laundering. Found guilty, swarmed by reporters. Inside the courtroom, though, it was much different than this sort of chaotic scene that you're looking at right now. Sheldon Silver himself was actually pretty calm as the jury read back their verdicts: guilty, 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 one after another on each of those 7 counts. I did notice him sort of drumming his fingers ever so slightly on the desk that was in front of him. I was sitting just a few rows directly behind him, so I couldn't see his face. But as I was walking out of the courtroom, I did notice him actually smiling at his attorneys. Sort of a different feel, though, when he did come down the federal courthouse steps and was swarmed by reporters. Didn't seem happy. In fact, expressed just the opposite, quite disappointment, as you can imagine, from this verdict. Liz?
But what's the feeling about an appeal?
So we did speak with his attorney very briefly. He did tell the whole swarm of reporters, his attorney, Stephen Molo, as well as himself, saying that they are going to have an appeal, that in fact is going to happen, that they, of course, are disappointed with the verdict. We also spoke with Mr. Cohen just a short time ago, and he again reiterated the fact that they will appeal, but that's something that could take months. He said that that's something that we wouldn't see necessarily until February. We also know that in the court proceedings earlier today, the judge didn't set a sentencing date, so at this point we're not quite sure when Sheldon Silver will be back in court. As many of you know, it's not like he was hauled away in handcuffs and taken to the federal prison right away. He will await his sentencing date. He was obviously released on his own accord, was escorted, as you probably saw in that video, in a black car, and went on his way along with some escorts earlier today. So, of course, we're going to keep on this for you as this continues to have its effects, not only here in Manhattan, but, of course, back in Albany, and we will keep you posted. We are live in Manhattan. Kimberly Howard, CBS 6 News.
All right, Kimberly, thank you so much.
Anybody has a negative image walking into the courtroom is probably an elected official in New York State.
And I'm sure there are other people in there maybe playing the same kind of a game, and hopefully they'll think about it and say, whoops, let's stop this right now.
And I think that is a brighter day in the state of New York. Anytime corruption is exposed and we get a conviction like this, it's good for the body politic.
Guilty as charged, former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver gears up now for an appeal after a unanimous jury convicts him of corruption. We'll hear how his fellow lawmakers are reacting tonight. CBS 6 News at 11 starts right now.
This is CBS 6 News.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Bishop. Greg has the night off. Albany is still reacting tonight from the news that former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver has been convicted on charges of taking bribes and kickbacks. A Manhattan jury found Silver guilty on all counts this afternoon. But if you ask Silver or his attorney, they'll tell you the battle may be lost, but the war is far from over. Kimberly Howard was there today when the verdict was read.
The trial of one of New York's most powerful politicians took just over a month, and the jury had no shortage of issues. But today, it only took a matter of seconds for them to deliver their unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. As former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver descends the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan, his long political career is on a downward slant, too. Silver, once one of the most powerful politicians in the state, now swarmed by the media after a jury of 8 women and 4 men found him guilty of fraud, extortion, and money laundering. He's immediately giving up the assembly seat he's kept warm for nearly 40 years, and he'll also go to prison, although none of his attorneys can help it.
We'll continue the legal fight. We're disappointed in the verdict. We're disappointed. We're disappointed.
Just disappointed right now, and ultimately, I believe, after we file the legal challenges, we'll have a different result.
The legal challenges will include an appeal. Silver's defense team admits could take months to set in motion.
It's going to be a while. There's a process. First, there are motions made before the judge that's going to take place over the next couple of months.
Also a process, deliberations. The jury discussed the case for less than 12 hours, but in that time, 2 jurors sent notes to the judge saying they wanted out. One of them was this juror, who refused to answer questions as he walked out of court, but in court, it was revealed he was concerned because the man who owns his taxi medallion apparently also knows Sheldon Silver. Judge Caproni instructed both uneasy jurors to continue deliberating, and eventually the verdict was unanimous. Silver lightly drumming his fingers on the courtroom table as the jury called out guilty 7 times. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, whose office brought the charges against Silver, releasing this statement saying Silver got justice, and so did the people of New York. The judge didn't set a sentencing date, but once that comes, Silver is facing fines as well as the rest of his life behind bars. In Manhattan, Kimberly Howard, CBS 6 News.
Now, the Capitol is no stranger to charges of corruption. Former State Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos and his son are currently on trial in Manhattan. The elder Skelos accused of using his office to line his son's pockets by getting him a no-show job. Joe Bruno, the powerful Senate Majority Leader, was eventually found not guilty on all counts after being indicted on corruption charges. Others not as fortunate. Former Senate Majority Leader Pedro ESPADA was convicted of tax fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Former Assembly member William Boylan Jr. of Brooklyn was convicted of a number of federal charges. Others convicted or awaiting trial include Current Assembly Member William Scarborough, former Assembly Member Eric Stevenson, former State Senator Shirley Huntley, former State Senate Majority Leader Malcolm Smith, former State Senate Democratic Leader John Sampson, and former State Senator Carl Kruger.
The only way you can stop this is having full-time legislators, full-time assembly persons, full-time senators, and then there's no outside income. So if they have outside income, it's going to come under the table and they're going to get put in jail the way they should.
Now, obviously, news of Silver's guilt has rocked the state capitol. With his conviction, he automatically forfeits the assembly seat he's held for nearly 40 years. Jennifer Lukey has been talking with some state lawmakers. She's live in our Capitol newsroom tonight to talk more about this. And Jen, I imagine it really is the only thing that people are talking about in Albany tonight.
Yeah, it sure is, Liz. This is a man who had a lot of power for a lot of years, and it's all gone tonight. Within minutes of his conviction, Sheldon Silver's assembly website was taken down, and the name placard on his office door was removed.
As swiftly as Silver dodged reporters tonight, assembly staffers removed any mention of him inside the state capitol.
Sheldon Silver has done a lot of good, not only as a member, but as a leader of the assembly for the last 20 years. But all the good that he has done, unfortunately, is tarnished because of the fact that at some point he made a decision to realize personal profit over public good.
It's a decision nearly 30 state lawmakers have made over the past decade.
We've got to get rid of it, and the only way to do it is to acknowledge it, expose it, get rid of it. So this is a positive development.
But despite today's conviction, it's possible Silver could continue to get the very same taxpayer money he is found guilty of abusing.
New York state law would allow him to keep his pension. Most taxpayers who hear that will think that is just crazy.
They're absolutely right, and let me be the first to publicly say he needs to be stripped of his pension when he is sentenced. The judge has that power. It happened in the Pedro ESPADA case. It can happen here. And because these crimes are so egregious and so outrageous and so self-serving, Sheldon Silver should be stripped of his pension.
But legislation that would have ensured that never got passed last